In the heart of Rajasthan's Thar Desert, where temperatures soar to a blistering 122 degrees Fahrenheit and the sun burns mercilessly for 8 months of the year, a discovery was made that defied everything engineers thought they knew about cooling systems. A simple farmer named Kanak Das had built something with nothing but mud, water, and ancient wisdom that outperformed million-dollar air conditioning units. But this isn't just a story about beating the heat. This is about how one man's crazy idea became a revolution that scientists are still trying to understand today. If you're fascinated by ingenious solutions that change everything, hit that subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. I read every single comment. Picture this. It's May 2018 in the village of Sirohi, Rajasthan. The mercury has crossed 50 degrees Celsius. That's 122 degrees Fahrenheit. The air shimmers with heat waves so intense they distort vision. Water evaporates before it hits the ground. Animals seek shelter in whatever shade they can find. Even the hardiest desert dwellers struggle to survive these conditions. In this inferno, Kanak Das, a 45-year-old farmer with weathered hands and sun-darkened skin, was working comfortably in his fields. Not under an air-conditioned shed, not with industrial cooling fans, but inside a tunnel he had dug by hand. A tunnel that maintained a steady, cool 77 degrees Fahrenheit, while the world above burned at 122. The tunnel itself defied logic. It wasn't deep, just 6 feet underground. It wasn't sophisticated. The walls were lined with nothing but locally sourced clay and cow dung. There were no mechanical systems, no electricity, no complex engineering. Just an L-shaped passage that stretched 100 feet through the earth, with simple ventilation shafts that seemed almost randomly placed. When agricultural scientists first heard about Kanak Das's tunnel, they were skeptical. Dr. Ravi Sharma, from the Indian Institute of Technology, initially dismissed the reports as exaggerated folklore. There's no way, he told his colleagues, that a hand-dug mud tunnel could achieve what industrial cooling systems struggle with. The physics doesn't add up. But the physics were about to be rewritten. The first scientific team arrived in Sirohi on a day when the outside temperature hit 124 degrees Fahrenheit. They brought sophisticated temperature monitoring equipment, humidity sensors, and thermal imaging cameras. What they discovered inside that tunnel would challenge decades of conventional cooling wisdom. The temperature readings were consistent, 77 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the entire length of the tunnel. The humidity was perfectly balanced. Air circulation was constant and natural. But most shocking of all, the cooling effect was achieved without consuming a single unit of electricity. Kanak Das had spent 3 years digging this tunnel, working only in the early morning hours and late evenings when the heat was bearable. He used no blueprints, no engineering calculations, no modern tools. His design was based entirely on traditional knowledge passed down through generations of desert dwellers, knowledge that had somehow been forgotten by modern science. The tunnel's entrance faced northeast, positioned to catch the coolest morning breezes. The walls were constructed using a specific mixture of clay, cow dung, and locally gathered minerals that created a natural insulation system. The L-shaped design wasn't random. It was engineered to create a natural thermal chimney effect that drew hot air up and out while pulling cooler air down from the surface. But the real genius lay in the details that only became apparent under scientific scrutiny. The tunnel's walls were porous, allowing for controlled moisture exchange that provided natural evaporative cooling. The placement of ventilation shafts followed an ancient, mathematical sequence that maximized airflow efficiency. Even the tunnel's slight downward slope served a purpose, creating pressure differentials that enhanced the cooling effect. As word spread about the tunnel, engineers and climate researchers from around the world began making pilgrimages to this small Rajasthani village. Dr. Anita Gupta from MIT called it the most elegant cooling solution I've ever encountered. Professor James Mitchell from Cambridge University declared it a masterclass in sustainable architecture that puts our modern systems to shame. The tunnel had cost Kanak Das approximately $200 to build and consumed zero energy to operate. In contrast, cooling a similar space using conventional air conditioning would require thousands of dollars in equipment and hundreds of dollars in monthly electricity costs. But as scientists began to understand the tunnel's mechanics, they realized this wasn't just about one farmer's ingenuity. This was about rediscovering ancient technologies that could revolutionize modern architecture and offer solutions to climate change. The tunnel represented something our high-tech world had forgotten, the power of working with nature instead of against it. Yet the most remarkable part of this story was still to come, because Kanak Das's tunnel was just the beginning of a discovery that would reveal centuries of lost architectural wisdom hidden beneath the sands of Rajasthan. The morning Dr. M.D. Ravi Sharma descended into Kanak Das's tunnel for the first time. He experienced something that would change his understanding of thermal engineering forever. As he moved from the scorching 122-degree surface into the tunnel's cool embrace, he felt the temperature drop 45 degrees in just 6 vertical feet. The sensation was so dramatic, so immediate, that he initially suspected his instruments were malfunctioning. But the instruments were working perfectly. What Dr. Sharma was experiencing was the rediscovery of a 1,000-year-old science that had somehow survived in the collective memory of Rajasthan's desert communities. Kanak Das, with his limited formal education but deep connection to ancestral knowledge, had unknowingly reconstructed what archaeologists now recognize as a simplified version of ancient Persian Qanat systems mixed with indigenous Indian subterranean architecture. These weren't just cooling tunnels. They were sophisticated climate control systems that had sustained civilizations in the world's harshest environments. The breakthrough came when Dr. Sharma began analyzing the tunnel's construction materials under a microscope. The clay wasn't ordinary clay. It was a specific type of Montmorillonite-rich earth that Kanak Das had traveled 15 kilometers to collect from a particular hillside. This clay had unique thermal properties. It absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly at night, creating a natural thermal buffer. The cow dung wasn't just a binding agent either. It contained specific microorganisms that, when dried, created a porous matrix with exceptional insulation properties. Combined with the clay, it formed a biocomposite material that modern synthetic insulations struggle to match in terms of thermal performance and environmental sustainability. But the real revelation came when historians cross-referenced Kanak Das's design with ancient texts. Dr. Priya Mehta, an archaeological researcher specializing in medieval Indian architecture, discovered references to similar cooling systems in 12th century manuscripts from the region. These documents described elaborate underground networks called Baoli systems, stepwells connected to cooling chambers that provided relief for entire communities during the brutal summer months. The manuscripts revealed that Rajasthani architects of the medieval period had developed sophisticated understanding of geothermal principles, air pressure dynamics, and natural ventilation systems. They knew that Earth 6 feet below the surface maintained a constant temperature year-round, cooler than the air in summer, warmer in winter. They understood how to harness prevailing winds and create pressure differentials to move air naturally through underground spaces. What made Kanak Das's achievement even more remarkable was that this knowledge had survived not through written records, but through oral tradition passed down through generations of farmers and village elders. His grandfather had told him stories about the cool earth houses that their ancestors built. His father had shown him how to identify the right type of clay by its smell and texture. His uncle had taught him the importance of tunnel orientation and the placement of air shafts. This wasn't random folk wisdom. It was sophisticated engineering knowledge encoded in stories, songs, and traditional practices. Dr. Sharma's team discovered that the tunnel's L-shaped design served multiple functions beyond just aesthetics. The bend created a natural airlock that prevented hot surface air from penetrating directly into the cool zone. It also established a pressure gradient that enhanced the natural convection currents. The specific angle of the L, approximately 120 degrees, was optimal for maximizing airflow while minimizing heat transfer. The ventilation shafts weren't randomly placed, either. They followed what Kanak Das called the breath points of the earth, locations where his grandfather had taught him to feel for natural air currents. Modern analysis revealed these points corresponded precisely to optimal locations for creating thermal chimneys based on underground air pressure patterns and surface wind dynamics. Even more fascinating was the discovery that Kanak Das had unconsciously incorporated principles from Vastu Shastra, the ancient Indian science of architecture. The tunnel's northeast entrance aligned with traditional beliefs about capturing positive energy, but it also happened to be the optimal orientation for thermal management in the desert climate. As word of these discoveries spread through academic circles, researchers began investigating other traditional cooling systems across Rajasthan. They found evidence of similar tunnels in dozens of villages, some dating back centuries. Many had been abandoned or forgotten as modern cooling systems became available, but a few elderly villagers still remembered the construction techniques. Dr. Mehta organized expeditions to document these sites before the knowledge disappeared entirely. What they found was a treasure trove of sustainable cooling technologies that could revolutionize modern architecture. Underground chambers that maintained 70-degree temperatures year-round. Natural refrigeration systems that kept food fresh without electricity. Passive air conditioning networks that could cool entire neighborhoods. But perhaps the most significant discovery was still ahead, because as scientists delved deeper into the ancient cooling systems of Rajasthan, they uncovered evidence of something that would challenge everything we thought we knew about sustainable architecture. 6 months after Dr. Ravi Sharma's first visit to Kanak Das's tunnel, something unprecedented happened in the world of sustainable architecture. MIT announced a $50 million research initiative to study what they called vernacular thermal engineering. Cambridge University established the world's first Department of Indigenous Climate Solutions. The United Nations declared Kanak Das's tunnel a climate heritage site, worthy of global protection and study. But the real revolution was happening in the villages of Rajasthan, where ancient knowledge was being reborn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now and let me know in the comments which traditional technique amazes you most. Dr. Sharma had returned to Sirohi with a team of international researchers and a budget that seemed impossible for such a small village. They weren't just studying Kanak Das's tunnel anymore. They were mapping an entire network of traditional cooling systems that had been hiding in plain sight across the Thar Desert. The breakthrough moment came when 78-year-old Kamla Devi, Kanak Das's aunt, led the research team to what locals called the Ghost Village, an abandoned settlement 30 kilometers from Sirohi that had been mysteriously comfortable even during the worst heat waves. What they found there defied every assumption about ancient cooling technology. Beneath the ruins of the 200-year-old village lay an intricate network of interconnected tunnels, cooling chambers, and air circulation systems that had once served over 500 residents. The system was so sophisticated that it included dedicated chambers for food storage, textile work, and even underground markets where villagers could conduct business during the brutal summer months. The tunnels weren't just cooling spaces. They were complete subterranean ecosystems. Some chambers maintained different temperature zones for specific purposes. One stayed at exactly 60 degrees for grain storage, another held steady at 75 degrees for living quarters, while a third reached an ice-cold 55 degrees for preserving dairy products and medicines, all achieved without any external energy source. But the most shocking discovery was the scale. Ground-penetrating radar revealed that the tunnel network extended over 15 kilometers underground, connecting multiple villages and creating what researchers now recognize as the world's first passive district cooling system. This wasn't just individual innovation. This was urban planning on a massive scale, designed to make desert life not just survivable, but comfortable. The system had been abandoned gradually during the British colonial period as traditional knowledge was discouraged in favor of European building methods. Families moved to surface dwellings, and within 2 generations, the knowledge of maintaining these underground cities was lost. The tunnels were sealed, filled with sand, and forgotten. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a thermal engineer from Barcelona, spent 3 months studying the ventilation dynamics of the Ghost Village system. Her findings revolutionized understanding of passive air circulation. The ancient builders had created a network of thermal chimneys that worked together like a massive underground lung, breathing cool air in during the night and expelling hot air during the day. The key was in the timing and orchestration. Different shafts opened and closed based on temperature differentials, wind direction, and time of day. Some shafts had ingenious covers made from specially treated wood that would automatically open or close based on humidity levels. Others used animal hide membranes that functioned as one-way valves, allowing air to flow in specific directions based on pressure changes. Modern computer modeling of the system revealed efficiency levels that surpassed contemporary green buildings. The ancient network achieved what modern architects call net zero energy cooling, maintaining comfortable temperatures while actually generating surplus cooling capacity that could be stored in specially designed thermal mass chambers. News of the discovery spread rapidly through social media and international conferences. Architecture firms from Dubai to Phoenix began sending teams to Rajasthan to study the techniques. The Indian government established the Traditional Cooling Technology Institute in Jaipur. UNESCO fast-tracked the tunnel systems for World Heritage consideration. But the real impact was being felt by ordinary people facing the growing crisis of climate change and energy costs. In Phoenix, Arizona, where summer temperatures regularly exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit, architect Sarah Chen used Kanak Das's principles to design a residential cooling system that reduced air conditioning costs by 80%. The design incorporated underground thermal mass chambers and passive ventilation systems inspired directly by the Rajasthani tunnels. In Australia's outback, mining companies began implementing tunnel-based cooling systems for workers in extreme heat conditions. The cost savings were dramatic. Installations that would have required millions in conventional cooling equipment were built for thousands using adapted traditional techniques. In urban heat islands like Delhi and Mumbai, city planners began incorporating underground cooling districts into new developments. These systems promised to reduce the urban heat island effect while providing comfortable public spaces during extreme weather events. The technology was spreading, but so was the recognition of what had been lost. Climate researchers estimated that if traditional cooling systems had continued to evolve instead of being abandoned, the world might have avoided much of the energy-intensive cooling that now contributes significantly to global greenhouse gas emissions. Kanak Das himself became an unlikely international celebrity. He was invited to speak at MIT, addressed the UN Climate Summit, and consulted on cooling projects from Morocco to Mexico. Yet he remained in his village, continuing to farm and continuing to dig tunnels, now with the assistance of volunteers from around the world who came to learn directly from the master. But the most important chapter of this story was still unfolding, because as traditional cooling techniques spread globally, researchers were discovering something that would change how humanity thinks about living with extreme heat. Dr. Sharma's hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the laboratory results for the third time. The data from Kanak Das's tunnel challenged fundamental assumptions about thermal dynamics that had guided engineering for over a century. What they had discovered wasn't just an efficient cooling system. It was a completely new understanding of how earth, air, water, and biological materials could work together to create what scientists were now calling living architecture. The breakthrough came when Dr. Sharma's team installed microsensors throughout the tunnel system to monitor temperature, humidity, air pressure, and molecular composition on a minute-by-minute basis over an entire year. What they found was that the tunnel wasn't just passively cool, it was actively managing its internal climate through a complex interaction of physical, chemical, and even biological processes. The walls themselves were alive in ways that modern science was only beginning to understand. The clay cow dung composite wasn't just insulation, it was a bioactive material that responded to environmental changes. During the day, as surface temperatures soared, the walls absorbed excess heat and moisture. At night, they released this stored energy gradually, creating temperature stability that machines couldn't match. But the real revelation came at the microscopic level. Dr. Priya Ghosh, a biochemist from the Indian Institute of Science, discovered that the cow dung in the wall mixture contained specific thermophilic bacteria, microorganisms that had evolved to thrive in extreme heat. These bacteria weren't just surviving in the wall material. They were actively processing organic compounds and generating cooling byproducts as part of their metabolism. The bacteria created a microecosystem within the tunnel walls that functioned like a biological air conditioning system. They consumed organic matter from the cow dung, processed ambient heat as an energy source, and expelled moisture and cooler air as waste products. This biological cooling system operated continuously, 24 hours a day, without any external energy input. Dr. Ghosh's findings were so revolutionary that she initially faced skepticism from the scientific community. The idea that ancient builders could have unknowingly harnessed bacterial cooling systems seemed too advanced for pre-industrial technology, but repeated testing confirmed the results, and similar bacterial colonies were found in traditional cooling systems across the region. The tunnel's air circulation system was equally sophisticated. Dr. Marco Alberti, a fluid dynamics specialist from the University of Bologna, used computational modeling to map the airflow patterns within Kanak Das's tunnel. He discovered that the system created what physicists call a thermal siphon, a self-sustaining circulation pattern that moved air through the tunnel without any mechanical assistance. The key was in the precise engineering of the tunnel's shape and orientation. The L-shaped design created pressure differentials that drove air circulation. Cool air entered through the northeast opening, flowed along the tunnel floor, rose as it warmed slightly, and exited through strategically placed vertical shafts. The system was so efficient that it completely refreshed the tunnel's air every 23 minutes, providing better ventilation than most modern buildings. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery was the tunnel's ability to extract moisture from the air and convert it into a cooling resource. The porous walls acted like a massive evaporation surface, drawing water vapor from the incoming air and using the latent heat of evaporation to create additional cooling. This process was so efficient that the tunnel actually generated net cooling. It removed more heat from the environment than it absorbed. Dr. Sharma calculated that Kanak Das's tunnel produced the cooling equivalent of a 5-ton air conditioning unit while consuming zero electricity and requiring minimal maintenance. The operational costs were essentially nothing beyond occasional wall repairs using locally available materials. The implications were staggering. If traditional cooling techniques could be scaled and modernized, they could potentially reduce global energy consumption for air conditioning by 60–80%. In a world where cooling demand was projected to triple by 2050 due to rising temperatures and global prosperity, this represented a solution to one of climate change's most pressing challenges. Research teams began racing to understand and replicate the tunnel's principles. NASA's Ames Research Center started developing biocomposite materials based on the clay cow dung mixture for space habitats. The MIT Media Lab created programmable Earth, smart building materials that could respond to environmental conditions like the tunnel walls. Silicon Valley companies invested billions in biomimetic cooling startups attempting to recreate the bacterial cooling systems in laboratory settings. Google's Project Thermal mimicked the tunnel's pressure dynamics for cooling data centers. Amazon's climate pledge included funding for traditional cooling research as part of their carbon neutrality goals. But the more scientists studied the system, the more they realized that its genius lay not in any single innovation, but in the holistic integration of multiple technologies. The tunnel worked because every element, from the bacterial colonies in the walls to the precise angle of the air shafts, had been optimized through generations of experimentation and refinement. This wasn't just ancient technology. It was evidence of a sophisticated understanding of complex systems that modern science was only beginning to appreciate. The tunnel represented thousands of years of accumulated knowledge about how to work with natural processes rather than against them. As researchers delved deeper into the science behind traditional cooling, they began to understand that they weren't just studying building techniques. They were uncovering a completely different philosophy of how humans could live sustainably on a warming planet. 3 years after the first scientific expedition to Kanak Das's tunnel, satellite imagery revealed something that changed everything researchers thought they knew about the scope of traditional cooling technology. Hidden separator, beneath centuries of sand and neglect, lay the remnants of what appeared to be the world's largest ancient climate control network, a system so vast and sophisticated that it dwarfed modern urban infrastructure. Dr. Sarah Chen from Stanford University was analyzing historical satellite data when she noticed unusual geometric patterns in the Rajasthani landscape. Using ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging from aircraft, her team discovered tunnel networks extending across hundreds of square kilometers, connecting ancient cities, trade routes, and agricultural centers in an integrated cooling infrastructure that had once supported over 1 million people. The network wasn't random. It followed the natural contours of the landscape, utilizing underground water sources, seasonal wind patterns, and geological formations to create a system that worked in harmony with the desert environment. The ancient builders had essentially air-conditioned an entire region, using nothing but earth, water, wind, and human ingenuity. At the center of this network was the lost city of Khadgar, abandoned over 300 years ago when a prolonged drought forced its inhabitants to relocate. Excavations revealed an urban cooling system so advanced that modern cities are only now developing equivalent technologies. The city featured underground markets, residential districts, workshops, and even entertainment venues, all maintained at comfortable temperatures through passive cooling techniques. The city's main cooling arteries were massive tunnels, some large enough to drive trucks through, that channeled cool air from underground rivers and shaded mountain valleys into the urban center. Secondary networks distributed this cooled air to individual buildings through smaller tunnels and vertical shafts. The system included thermal storage chambers that collected cool air at night and released it gradually during the day. But the most remarkable discovery was evidence of what researchers now call community cooling, shared systems that served multiple families and neighborhoods. Ancient building codes, inscribed on stone tablets found in the ruins, mandated that new construction connect to the cooling network and maintain specific thermal efficiency standards. Violating these codes resulted in substantial fines and even exile from the city. Dr. Amara Hassan, an archaeologist specializing in urban systems, discovered that Khadgar's cooling network required constant maintenance by specialized craftsmen called Thanda Mistris, cooling masters who understood the complex interactions between different parts of the system. These craftsmen held prestigious positions in society, comparable to modern engineers, and their knowledge was closely guarded through guild systems and apprenticeships. The guild records, preserved in underground archives protected from the desert heat, revealed technical knowledge that surpassed modern understanding in many areas. The cooling masters had developed precise mathematical formulas for calculating airflow rates, thermal transfer coefficients, and optimal tunnel dimensions based on local climate conditions. They understood concepts like thermal inertia, pressure dynamics, and evaporative cooling centuries before these principles were formally described by European scientists. Most remarkably, they had solved problems that modern green building designers still struggle with. The ancient system achieved what contemporary architects call thermal comfort, maintaining not just cool temperatures but optimal humidity levels, air quality, and even air movement that felt natural and pleasant to inhabitants. The guild archives also revealed the social and economic systems that supported the cooling network. Maintenance costs were shared among all users through a sophisticated taxation system based on the cooling capacity each building received. Wealthy merchants paid higher fees to support cooling for public spaces and to subsidize access for poorer families. The system was designed to ensure that effective cooling was available to all residents, regardless of economic status. Dr. Hassan's team found evidence that the cooling network supported not just human comfort, but entire economic systems. Underground workshops maintained optimal conditions for textile production, metalworking, and food processing even, during extreme heat waves. The city's famous silk industry, which supplied luxury goods across Asia, depended on temperature-controlled workshops that kept silkworms comfortable and productive year-round. Agricultural systems were integrated with the urban cooling network. Cool air from the city was channeled to nearby farms during the day, while the evapotranspiration from irrigated fields helped cool air that was drawn back into the urban system at night. This created a symbiotic relationship between city and countryside that supported both food production and urban comfort. The scale of the engineering achievement was staggering. The main cooling tunnel network extended over 400 kilometers underground, with over 50,000 individual access points and maintenance shafts. The system included backup routes and redundant pathways that ensured cooling continued, even if sections were damaged or blocked. Emergency protocols diverted cooling capacity to hospitals and shelters during extreme weather events. But perhaps most impressive was the system's sustainability. Archaeological evidence suggested the network operated continuously for over 800 years with minimal environmental impact. Unlike modern air conditioning, which consumes massive amounts of electricity and releases heat into the atmosphere, the ancient system actually helped cool the regional climate by facilitating evaporation and plant growth. The discovery of Khadgar's cooling network revolutionized understanding of what was possible with passive thermal management. Urban planners from around the world began studying the ancient city's design principles. Architecture schools added courses on traditional cooling to their curricula. The Indian government announced plans to reconstruct parts of the network for modern use. Yet as researchers celebrated these discoveries, they also confronted a sobering realization. The knowledge and infrastructure that had sustained comfortable life in one of the world's harshest climates for nearly a millennium had been lost in just 3 generations. What other solutions to climate challenges had been forgotten in humanity's rush toward industrial technologies? By 2024, Kanak Das's simple mud tunnel had sparked a global revolution that was reshaping how humanity approached cooling in an increasingly hot world. From the skyscrapers of Singapore to the favelas of São Paulo, architects and engineers were implementing cooling techniques that trace their lineage directly back to the traditional knowledge of Rajasthan's desert communities. The transformation was most visible in India itself, where the government had launched the Thermal Heritage Initiative, a massive program to document, preserve, and modernize traditional cooling systems across the country. The initiative identified over 12,000 sites where ancient cooling techniques were still in use or could be restored, creating what officials called cooling corridors that connected rural and urban areas through shared thermal management infrastructure. In the city of Jodhpur, just 200 kilometers from Kanak Das's village, urban planners were constructing the world's first thermal district, a neighborhood designed around passive cooling principles derived from traditional techniques. The project integrated underground cooling tunnels, biocomposite building materials, and community thermal management systems to create comfortable living conditions without conventional air conditioning. The Jodhpur Thermal District served 15,000 residents in buildings that maintained temperatures 15-20 degrees cooler than surrounding areas while consuming 90% less energy for climate control. The project's success led to similar developments in Phoenix, Riyadh, Alice Springs, and dozens of other cities facing extreme heat challenges. Dr. Ravi Sharma, now director of the International Center for Traditional Thermal Technologies, had seen his small research project grow into a global movement involving thousands of scientists, engineers, and practitioners. The center's database contained detailed documentation of cooling techniques from over 80 countries, revealing that sophisticated passive thermal management had been developed independently by cultures around the world. In Morocco, researchers rediscovered Malkaf systems, wine towers that captured breezes and channeled them through underground passages cooled by flowing water. In Iran, teams restored ancient badgirs, towering structures that created powerful natural air conditioning through pressure differentials and evaporative cooling. In the American Southwest, archaeologists documented elaborate cooling systems built by ancestral Puebloan peoples that had maintained comfortable temperatures in cliff dwellings for centuries. But the modern applications went far beyond historical reconstruction. Technology companies were developing smart earth-building materials that mimicked the responsive properties of traditional clay cow dung composites. These materials contained embedded sensors and shape memory alloys that allowed walls to adjust their thermal properties automatically based on environmental conditions. Tesla's Gigafactory in Nevada incorporated cooling tunnels, inspired by Kanak Das's design to maintain optimal battery manufacturing temperatures. The system reduced the facility's cooling energy consumption by 60% while improving air quality for workers. Google's data centers in India used traditional thermal chimney principles to cool server rooms, achieving unprecedented efficiency in managing the enormous heat generated by cloud computing infrastructure. The biotechnology applications were perhaps most revolutionary. Researchers had isolated the thermophilic bacteria from traditional cooling systems and engineered them to work in modern contexts. These cooling microbes were being incorporated into building materials, creating living walls that actively processed heat and generated cooling as part of their biological functions. Startup companies like Thermal Bio and Cool Microbes raised hundreds of millions in venture capital to commercialize bacterial cooling systems for everything from smartphone cases to automotive applications. The technology promised to revolutionize thermal management across industries, offering biological alternatives to energy-intensive mechanical cooling systems. Educational institutions worldwide had embraced traditional thermal knowledge. MIT's Vernacular Cooling program became one of the most competitive graduate specializations in engineering. The University of Cambridge established the Traditional Knowledge Institute, dedicated to studying and preserving indigenous technical knowledge before it disappeared entirely. High school students in desert regions learned to build cooling tunnels as part of physics and environmental science curricula. Youth climate activists organized cooling workshops, where traditional knowledge holders taught modern techniques for passive thermal management. The movement was creating a new generation that understood both ancient wisdom and contemporary technology. The economic impact was substantial. The Global Cooling Alliance estimated that traditional cooling techniques could reduce worldwide energy consumption for air conditioning by 40–60% by 2040, representing trillions of dollars in energy savings and carbon emission reductions. Investment in traditional cooling research and infrastructure exceeded $50 billion globally, creating new industries and employment opportunities in regions previously marginalized by technological development. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. The success of traditional cooling techniques had challenged assumptions about progress and development that had dominated thinking for centuries. The idea that newer technology was automatically better was being replaced by more nuanced understanding of appropriate technology, solutions that worked with natural systems rather than against them. Kanak Das himself had become an unlikely ambassador for this new philosophy. Now in his 50s, he traveled internationally as a consultant and lecturer, teaching cooling techniques to engineers and architects who had spent decades designing energy-intensive buildings. His simple message resonated across cultures: work with the earth, not against it. Yet for all the global attention and technological advances, Kanak Das remained grounded in his original motivation: creating comfortable conditions for agricultural work in one of the world's harshest environments. He continued to farm, continued to refine his cooling techniques, and continued to share knowledge freely with anyone willing to learn. The traditional cooling movement matured from curiosity to mainstream adoption. Researchers began investigating what other traditional technologies might hold keys to contemporary challenges. The success of cooling systems suggested that ancient knowledge might offer solutions to problems ranging from water management to sustainable agriculture to climate adaptation. 7 years after Dr. Ravi Sharma first descended into Kanak Das's tunnel, the world was a different place. Global temperatures had risen another degree, making extreme heat events routine across much of the planet. But humanity's response to this crisis had been transformed by the rediscovery of ancient wisdom buried beneath the sands of Rajasthan. Cities around the world were going underground, not in desperate retreat from an uninhabitable surface, but in planned, systematic adoption of subterranean cooling systems that made urban life not just survivable, but comfortable even as surface. Temperatures soared past previous limits of human endurance. Singapore had completed the world's largest passive cooling network, a 200-kilometer underground system that maintained comfortable temperatures across the entire city-state, while reducing air conditioning energy consumption by 70%. The system combined traditional tunnel cooling with modern materials and monitoring systems, creating what urban planners called thermal resilience infrastructure, capable of sustaining the city through climate extremes. In Dubai, where summer temperatures now regularly exceeded 130 degrees Fahrenheit, an entire business district operated underground using cooling principles derived directly from Kanak Das's design. The Palm Thermal District housed 200,000 workers in offices, shops, restaurants, and recreational facilities that maintained comfortable conditions without conventional air conditioning. The project had become a model for development in regions where surface conditions were becoming increasingly hostile to human activity. Phoenix, Arizona had transformed from one of America's least sustainable cities to a global leader in thermal management. The Phoenix Underground connected residential neighborhoods, business districts, and public facilities through a network of cooling tunnels that made the city livable even during record-breaking heat waves. Real estate values in tunnel-connected properties had skyrocketed as traditional surface buildings became difficult to cool affordably. The technology had evolved far beyond simple mud tunnels. Modern systems incorporated advanced material science, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology while maintaining the fundamental principles discovered in traditional systems. Smart tunnel networks used machine learning to optimize airflow patterns based on weather forecasts and usage patterns. Biocomposite materials enhanced with engineered cooling bacteria provided thermal management that responded dynamically to environmental conditions. Yet the most remarkable developments were happening in the villages of Rajasthan, where traditional knowledge was being preserved and extended by new generations of cooling masters. Young people who might have migrated to cities for opportunities were staying in their ancestral communities, learning from elders like Kanak Das, while developing innovations that combined ancient wisdom with contemporary technology. Priya, Kanak Das's 22-year-old niece, had become a leading figure in this renaissance. With an engineering degree from IIT Delhi and training from her uncle in traditional techniques, she was developing what she called adaptive tunnels, cooling systems that could modify their thermal properties based on seasonal conditions and usage requirements. Her designs incorporated shape memory materials that adjusted tunnel dimensions based on temperature, smart ventilation systems that responded to wind patterns and air pressure changes, and integrated water management that captured monsoon rainfall for year-round evaporative cooling. The systems combined traditional craftsmanship with precision engineering, creating cooling infrastructure that was both high-tech and deeply rooted in cultural knowledge. The Global Cooling Alliance had documented traditional cooling techniques in 127 countries, revealing a vast treasure trove of thermal management knowledge that was being lost at an alarming rate. Their urgency was justified. Climate researchers estimated that traditional knowledge holders were dying faster than new practitioners could be trained, creating a thermal knowledge extinction crisis that threatened to close the window on sustainable cooling solutions. But the momentum was shifting in favor of preservation and innovation. UNESCO had designated traditional cooling systems as intangible cultural heritage of humanity, providing funding and international support for documentation and training programs. The traditional cooling revival had created economic opportunities that made preserving indigenous knowledge financially attractive for communities that had previously seen it as obsolete. Universities worldwide were establishing partnerships with traditional knowledge communities, creating research collaborations that benefited both scientific advancement and cultural preservation. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Traditional Thermal Technologies Lab was staffed by researchers from India, Morocco, Iran, Mexico, and Australia, combining diverse approaches to passive cooling in a global knowledge-sharing network. Corporate investment continued to accelerate. Apple had incorporated traditional cooling principles into the design of their new campus in Austin, Texas, creating work environments that remained comfortable during extreme heat events while reducing energy consumption by 80%. Microsoft's Azure data centers used engineered versions of traditional cooling bacteria to manage server temperatures, achieving efficiency improvements that saved millions of dollars annually while reducing carbon emissions. As Kanak Das approached his 60th birthday, he reflected on how his simple desire to work comfortably in his fields had sparked a global transformation. His tunnel, originally built for personal use, had become the foundation for cooling systems serving millions of people worldwide. Traditional knowledge that had been dismissed as obsolete was now recognized as essential technology for humanity's climate future, yet he remained focused on the fundamentals that had guided his original innovation. "The earth knows how to stay cool," he would tell visitors to his village. "We just need to listen to what it teaches us." The future was being written in tunnels beneath cities around the world, where ancient wisdom and modern technology combined to create living spaces adapted to a changing climate. In the underground chambers where millions now worked, lived, and thrived despite surface temperatures that would have been lethal just decades earlier, Kanak Das's legacy continued to grow, 1 degree cooler, 1 tunnel deeper, 1 community at a time. The revolution that began with a farmer's crazy idea had become humanity's answer to one of climate change's greatest challenges, proving that sometimes the most advanced solutions are the oldest ones, waiting patiently beneath our feet.